The story of Madeline is not just terrifying. It's something you'll carry with you long after the lights go out. A haunting tale of a young girl whose life unraveled within the cold, unyielding walls of Mother Mary's Asylum. This isn't just another story of whispers in the dark. This is a descent into something far worse. Something that lingers. Welcome to Eerie Short and Scary Stories, where we bring you the most chilling tales from the darkest corners of imagination. If you're a fan of unsettling stories that stay with you long after they're told, you're in the right place. Tonight, I'm going to take you to a place that exists in the shadows of memory, a place with secrets so deep, even the walls seem to weep. Mother Mary's Asylum. To those on the outside, it was a sanctuary for troubled children, a refuge for the lost. But those who worked there knew the truth. It was a house of torment. And for Madeline, it was the beginning of something no one could ever explain. Something that would twist reality into nightmares. Do you feel that? That chill creeping up your spine? That's the air of Mother Mary's. Heavy, suffocating, and filled with a silence that hides something waiting, watching. Close your doors, dim the lights, and prepare yourself. Because the story you're about to hear isn't just a tale, it's a warning. Now, let's step inside, shall we? Madeline was only 10 years old when her parents first noticed something was different. At first, it was subtle. She spent hours alone in her room, talking softly to herself. They thought it was just an imaginary friend, the harmless whimsy of a child with an active imagination. But then, her whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if she were arguing with someone only she could see. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" her mother had asked one evening, standing in the doorway of her dimly lit room. Madeline didn't answer. She simply turned her head, her eyes wide and unblinking, her face pale like she hadn't seen the sun in days. Her lips moved again, but this time no sound came out. At night, it got worse. The sounds of muffled laughter and quiet sobbing would seep through the walls, leaving her parents restless and uneasy. When they tried to confront her, she would only shake her head and mutter, "They don't like it when you're here." Her mother couldn't ignore the unease any longer when she found scratches on the walls of Madeline's room. Deep, jagged marks carved into the paint, like something had clawed its way out of her nightmares. But the worst was the look on Madeline's face when her mother asked about it. "It wasn't me," she said with a chilling calmness. "It was him." Her father dismissed it as a phase, but her mother knew better. The way her laughter echoed through the house late at night, sharp and hollow, wasn't something a child should be capable of. And then there was the incident with the family cat, Mr. Whiskers. One morning, the cat simply vanished. "Madeline," her mother asked, trying to mask her fear, "did you see where Mr. Whiskers went?" Madeline tilted her head and smiled. "He doesn't like cats." That was the breaking point. Her mother couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else in the house, something beyond their understanding, and it was getting closer to their daughter. "She's not safe here," her mother whispered one night, her hands trembling as she clutched her husband's arm. Behind them, from the shadows of the hallway, came the sound of soft, high-pitched giggles. By morning, the decision was made. Mother Mary's Asylum for Wayward Children wasn't a place they'd ever imagined for their daughter, but at least there, they hoped, she might find some help. Some peace. As they packed her things, her mother couldn't stop glancing at the doorway, where Madeline sat on the floor, staring into the corner of the room and whispering. "You're not coming with me," Madeline said softly. "He says you can't." Her parents didn't respond. They didn't want to ask who she was talking about. They didn't want to know. The asylum loomed ahead, shrouded in mist, its iron gates groaning as if reluctant to let her in. The building stood like a grim monument to despair, its towering stone walls streaked with years of rain and decay. The windows were black, unlit, as if the place itself refused to show what lurked within. As the car came to a stop, Madeline sat silently in the back seat, her small hands clutching a tattered doll, her eyes fixed on the heavy doors that waited for her. Her mother hesitated as she opened the door, her breath hitching as she whispered, "It's for the best." Madeline stepped out, her bare feet making no sound against the gravel path, her expression blank. Behind her, the gates groaned shut with a metallic thud, sealing her fate. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, carrying with it the faint smell of damp stone and something older. The halls stretched long and dim, the flickering of the overhead lights casting unsettling shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked open, followed by the faint echo of footsteps, soft and deliberate, as if someone or something was watching. Sister Kay stood at the end of the corridor, her hands clasped tightly around a rosary. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed her unease. A woman of deep faith and unwavering resolve, she had seen many troubled children pass through these halls. But as her gaze met Madeline's, something inside her wavered. Madeline tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes locked on Sister Kay, unblinking. For the briefest moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, a subtle weight pressing down on the sister's chest. Still, she greeted the girl with a warm smile. "Welcome, Madeline," Sister Kay said gently, her voice steady despite the faint tremor in her hands. "You're safe here." Madeline didn't reply. She simply walked past her, her footsteps unnaturally soft, like the shadows themselves were carrying her forward. Over the next few days, Sister Kay tried to connect with her. She brought Madeline to the chapel, knelt beside her, and guided her through prayers. The girl said nothing, her lips pressed tightly together as she stared ahead at the stained glass window, her expression unreadable. At night, Sister Kay would visit her room, bringing a small candle and a Bible. She would sit by the bedside, reading softly, hoping the words might soothe whatever torment the girl carried. But Madeline never responded. She would simply stare into the corner of the room, her eyes tracking something unseen. One night, as Sister Kay finished a prayer, Madeline's voice broke the silence. It was low, almost a hiss, and it sent a shiver racing down the sister's spine. "You're wasting your time," Madeline said, her gaze still fixed on the empty corner. Sister Kay felt the blood drain from her face. She clutched her rosary tighter, her lips parting to form a response, but no words came. Madeline turned her head then, slowly, her eyes meeting Sister Kay's with a coldness that made the room feel even darker. "He doesn't like you," the girl whispered. From somewhere deep in the asylum, a faint giggle echoed through the halls, soft and fleeting, like a child's laughter carried on the wind. Sister Kay stood abruptly, her heart pounding as she forced herself to speak. "I will not stop trying, Madeline," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. "You are not alone." But Madeline only smiled, a small, unnerving curve of her lips, before turning back to the corner. Sister Kay left the room that night, her faith strong but her heart heavy. She could feel it now, the presence that clung to the asylum like a shadow that could not be cast away. And she knew that whatever had brought Madeline here was far from finished. Do you think Madeline was truly possessed, or was something else at play? Share your theories in the comments. Madeline's behavior had gone far beyond troubling. By the third week, the scratches on the walls of her room weren't just faint marks. They were deep grooves that carved into the plaster, jagged and uneven, like they'd been made in a frenzy. The staff avoided her now, whispering among themselves, their voices tight with unease. It was the nights that were the worst. Sister Kay would hear it from her room, a sharp, relentless scraping sound echoing through the halls, followed by Madeline's cries. They weren't the cries of a scared child. They were guttural, primal, as if something inside her was clawing its way out. One evening, Sister Kay found her kneeling on the floor, her fingernails bloodied as she tore at the wall. Her body was trembling, but her strength seemed unnatural, her hands moving with a violent determination. "Madeline!" Sister Kay cried, rushing to her. She grabbed the girl's arms, pulling her away. Madeline's head snapped up, and for a moment, her eyes looked empty, blackened, as if the child inside her was no longer there. "He's coming," Madeline whispered, her voice cold and lifeless. Sister Kay knew she couldn't handle this alone anymore. She wrote to Father Stephen, a priest known for his work with exorcisms, and pleaded for his help. Within days, he arrived, his presence filling the room with a weighty calm, though his expression betrayed the dread he felt as he entered the asylum. The exorcism was arranged in the chapel, a place meant to feel sacred, though the moment they stepped inside, it felt anything but. Madeline sat in the center of the room, her wrists bound gently to the chair. She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She just watched them, her lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile. Father Stephen began the ritual, his voice steady as he chanted the words of the exorcism. At first, the room was silent, save for his prayers. Then, the air shifted. It grew heavy, oppressive, like the very walls were closing in. Madeline's smile widened. Her head tilted back slightly, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from her throat, a sound that no child should have been able to make. "Leave this child," Father Stephen commanded, his voice firm. The growl deepened, vibrating through the air, and Madeline began to laugh. It was sharp and hollow, echoing unnaturally off the walls. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice eerily calm, her eyes wide and unblinking. The candles in the room flickered violently before extinguishing all at once, plunging the chapel into darkness. The only sound was Madeline's breathing, slow and measured, though it seemed to come from every corner of the room. Then, the lights above them exploded in a shower of glass, and chaos erupted. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting into monstrous shapes, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Sister Kay clutched her rosary, whispering prayers under her breath as Father Stephen continued to chant, his voice strained but unwavering. Madeline began to convulse, her body arching violently as she let out a blood-curdling scream. Her head snapped toward Sister Kay, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. What Sister Kay saw would haunt her forever. Madeline's face had twisted into something unrecognizable, her skin pale and stretched tight, her mouth unnaturally wide, revealing teeth that seemed far too sharp. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The room fell silent, the shadows receded, and Madeline's body went limp in the chair. For a moment, it seemed as though the ritual had worked, that the darkness had been driven out. But as Sister Kay approached, She saw the faintest flicker of movement on Madeline's lips. A smile. Small, but unmistakable. And in that smile, she knew, whatever had been in Madeline hadn't left. It was still there, waiting, watching, and biding its time. By morning, the asylum's halls were unnervingly quiet. The usual creaks and groans of the old building seemed to hold their breath, and the oppressive stillness felt heavier than usual. When Sister Kay entered Madeline's room, her heart sank. The bed was empty. The restraints that had held her in place were frayed, as though something had burned through them. The faint smell of sulfur lingered in the air. Sister Kay stood frozen, staring at the abandoned bed, her mind racing. The girl hadn't escaped, she knew that much. No child could have left without a sound, without triggering the iron gates or alerting the staff. But what truly terrified her wasn't how Madeline was gone, it was the oppressive presence that still hung in the room. She whispered softly to herself, clutching her rosary for comfort. She's gone. But the presence she left behind, it's still here. Over the next few weeks, the asylum staff began noticing strange occurrences. Lights flickering for no reason, the sound of faint whispers echoing down the empty halls at night, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. More than one staff member reported hearing the soft giggle of a child, though no one could ever find its source. They started avoiding the East Wing, where Madeline's room once stood. Even the bravest among them refused to go near it after sunset. The few who dared swore they could feel her eyes on them, as though she were hiding just beyond the shadows, waiting. To this day, Mother Mary's asylum stands abandoned, its gates rusted shut, its windows boarded, its halls silent. But those who pass by at night say they can still hear it, the soft sound of laughter drifting through the air. Laughter that doesn't belong to any living soul. Madeline's story reminds us that sometimes the darkest horrors aren't the ones we see, but the ones we feel lingering just beyond our understanding. The kind that stay with you, haunting your thoughts when the lights go out. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, don't worry about the shadows in your room. Unless, of course, they start to move. Sleep well, if you can. And before you shut your eyes, hit that subscribe button. Who knows? Maybe keeping the lights on for one more video will be the best decision you make tonight.